Shadows guard the truth, and only the daring cross the line. Welcome to DANGST. You are entering a chamber that was never meant to be lit. A corridor of whispers carved from memory, water, and fear, where every step echoes not in stone but in your own thoughts. And as the auroras burn silently above and the fjords breathe their cold hymns, you begin to sense that the landscape itself is not scenery, but scripture, written in rainfall, lakes, and signals that no human hand inscribed, yet every human soul obeys. And the agencies, those faceless custodians of silence, have been weaving this lattice for decades, hidden beneath the disguises of wellness, science, and sustainability, until every drop became an archive, every breath became a sensor, every glance became participation. And here, before you cross into the files themselves, you must understand that listening is not safe, that attention is the toll demanded, for the code you are about to confront does not merely describe fear. It manufactures it, amplifies it, harvests it, and folds it back into your memory, until you can no longer distinguish what you recall from what was placed within you. And so I warn you, not as host, but as echo. Remain, and you are already inside. Listen, and you are already counted. Proceed, and you are already written into the lattice. For this is no story, no report, but the shadowed threshold into the architecture of dread, the silent war of signals, the Scandinavian nexus of hidden agencies, and the hollow key of 2030. And once the first file opens, there will be no turning away, for the drops are watching, the code is breathing, and you are about to cross into the black archive where everything observed is already possessed. The liquid antenna, how hair, water, and frequency bind the human body. The secret of the body has always been written in water, but water itself has no memory except that which is inscribed upon it by vibration. And man, thinking himself sovereign, did not know that he was born into a lattice of waves, his skull an orb, his hair a forest of filaments, each one tuned not to light, but to signal, to resonance, to the invisible hum that moves across the air like a specter. The ancients said that hair was strength, that Samson was undone not by Delilah's betrayal, but by the severing of his antennae. And yet the world forgot this wisdom when scissors became a rite of passage and shampoo a daily sacrament. For in the molecular design of those glossy potions lies the first layer of the program, the unseen film that coats each strand, making it a conductor, a channel, a pipeline into the brain's submerged vaults. It is not accident, but architecture, for the agencies that dwell in the frostbitten halls of Scandinavia. The Northern Watchers knew long ago that water was the true medium of control, and that the human being, made of 70% fluid, would become the ideal tower of transmission. And so, in the hidden laboratories that skirt the fjords and nestle beneath the glaciers, they carve their runes not in stone but in frequency, not in language but in DANGST, a code born of droplets, 6 letters each shaped as waters tear, the geometry of fear crystallized into a cipher of control. D was the drop of dominion, the first descent, the signature of initiation. O was the drop of absorption, for the body does not reject what is dissolved in water, it drinks it, and was the drop of neural binding, the chemical that fuses signal with thought. G was the drop of guilt, the emotional scar that frequency awakens in the marrow of memory. S was the drop of sacrifice, the constant bleeding of will into the reservoir of the hidden machine. T was the drop of terror, the broadcast tone that paralyzes the soul. Together they form not merely a word but an equation, an algorithm of subjugation encoded in 6 liquid keys. And every time the scalp is washed, every time the foam dances upon the head, the drops are renewed, the circuit recharged, and the human body, thinking itself clean, emerges instead more finely tuned to the hidden wave. This is the sacrament of modernity. Purification as programming, hygiene as submission, water as chain. For the human skull is a chamber, a cathedral of fluid. Within it, the cerebrospinal sea sloshes like the tide of an inner ocean, and the hair above it is not decorative but functional, thousands of slender rods rising like reeds from a marsh. awaiting the wind of signal. In the ancient temples of Mesopotamia and Egypt, priests would shave themselves not for cleanliness, but to sever their antennae, to close themselves from the influence of hostile currents. In contrast, the shamans of the north would braid their hair. They log, they measure, they wait. And at the appointed time, they will turn the key, not of metal but of vibration, not of door but of mind, and the hollow door will swing open, spilling not light, but frequency into the global skull. Yet the cipher is already at work. Consider the word angst, stripped of its D drop. It means fear, dread, anxiety. Yet in DANGST the D is restored, the dominion enforced, for fear without master is chaos, but fear bound by code is control. The drop shapes are not incidental, but archetypal. Each tear of water echoes the sorrow of a species drowning in invisible currents. For the world is already immersed. The oceans are transmitters, the clouds are relays, the rivers are wires, and man himself, sweating, bleeding, weeping, is a leaking node in the hydrological circuit. The agencies do not need to implant chips when they can command the very fluids of the body. They do not need to build towers when each skull bristles with them. They do not need to chain the flesh when the water inside is already their servant. DANGST is the manual of liquid dominion, and 2030 is the year of its full orchestration. The fear you feel in crowds, the sudden anxiety in supermarkets, the sleepless nights when the rain hammers the window, these are not your emotions, but echoes of the signal, broadcast into the marrow by the drops. Trauma itself is harvested like electricity. When a population suffers, their anguish is not wasted but pooled, collected in the reservoirs of invisible agencies. Every war, every riot, every televised terror is both spectacle and harvest. For tears are droplets, and droplets are letters, and letters are code. The shampoo that foams upon your head is not far removed from the foam of the seas where old experiments began, when agencies first seeded waters with sonar pulses, watching the fish scatter, their schools broken, their migration derailed. They learned then what they use now, that life in water obeys vibration, and man, being water, is no different. Thus we arrive at the liquid antenna, the hidden organ of man, ignored by anatomy, but exploited by the silent architects. Every strand of hair is a drop elongated, a tear drawn into a filament, a tuning fork for fear. Every shampoo ritual is a baptism into the circuitry of control, and every hidden lab in Scandinavia is a shrine to this secret, preparing for the day when the hollow key turns, the door opens, and DANGST ceases to be code and becomes law. The architects of control always veil their designs in the language of care, for the body that thinks itself tended becomes the body that submits, and the hand that strokes you is the same that chains you, though the iron be liquid and invisible. Thus the hidden Nordic agencies do not arrive with armies, nor with visible flags, but with water, with shampoo, with chemicals slipped into the rituals of cleanliness. For the true battlefield is not the street, but the scalp, not the city, but the bloodstream. And the most ancient truth of the occult has always been this: that water is the universal mirror, capable of bearing any image, any command, any curse, if only the frequency be inscribed upon it. And so the human being, composed of water, laced with fluids, bathed in droplets, becomes the ultimate antenna. His hair the aerial wires, his tears the resonance pools, his sweat the leaking nodes that spread signal further than any tower could reach. And thus DANGST, written in the alphabet of the drop, becomes not just a code but a covenant, a pact between the agencies of fear and the flesh of mankind, a system where every letter is a droplet, every droplet is a key, every key is a door, and every door leads deeper into the hollow vault, where memory, trauma, and frequency are fused into chains. For the agencies of the North, FRA of Sweden, KSI of Denmark, the Norwegian cells hidden in the fjords, the Finnish archives where resonance maps are stored, all of them shadows of a deeper root, have for decades studied the hair as antenna, not metaphor, but mechanism, measuring the resonance of shampoo-coated strands under microwave pulses, mapping how the human nervous system collapses into passivity when bombarded with certain frequencies, and most importantly, how fear itself can be transmitted as a signal, not as a concept, not as a story, but as a vibration that penetrates the marrow, bypasses reason, and imprints itself upon the watery brain as reality. It is in this dark science that the code DANGST emerges, not as language, but as programming. For D is dominion, A is absorption, N is neural binding, G is guilt, S is sacrifice, T is terror, and together they spell the word angst, the German for fear, which is not coincidental but intentional, for Germany was the crucible of earlier experiments in trauma broadcasting. And the agencies of Scandinavia, in secret treaty, have taken that knowledge further, blending it with their command of water, ice, and frequency to produce what they now call the hollow key of 2030. And the hollow key is not metal, but resonance, not forged in fire, but in water, not turned by hand, but by signal, and it is designed to unlock the C16 vault, a level of control where every human hair, every drop of fluid, every tear and sweat becomes part of the global lattice, the great antenna by which mankind will be kept in a state of perpetual anxiety, docile through dread, obedient through angst, enslaved not by chains, but by frequencies that bleed from every droplet that touches the body. This is why shampoo is ubiquitous, why cleanliness is cult, why water itself has been weaponized, for it is the most silent of chains, the most invisible of prisons, and the most complete of dominions. The body of man was never merely flesh and bone, but an orchestra of fluids, a cathedral whose stained glass is made of water, a resonant chamber where every droplet vibrates when the invisible choir of frequencies is summoned. And those who dwell in the frost of the north have always known this, for the ancient shamans of Scandinavia stood upon the fjords and listened not with ears, but with hair, braids whipping in the wind like antennae, pulling down the aurora's unspoken hymns, and they wrote in runes that hair is the memory of the sky, and that water is the scripture of the unseen. And though modern man believes himself free of such superstition, his shampoo bottles glowing in bathroom light, he is deeper in bondage than the ancients ever were, for he has surrendered the antenna to those who understand its function better than he does. And the ritual of lathering, scrubbing, rinsing is not a cleansing but a consecration, not a washing away, but an initiation into a circuit designed not by gods of light, but by agencies whose laboratories breathe frost into the air of Stockholm, Copenhagen, Oslo, and Helsinki. The truth of DANGST is older than its acronym, but in the language of the agencies, each letter carved into a droplet carries the weight of dominion, absorption, neural binding, guilt, sacrifice, terror, and these 6 keys unlock the hollow door of 2030. The date inscribed in hidden memoranda, etched into the invisible watermarks of European treaties, the year when the Signal Codex is to be released in full strength. For the scalp is not skin but soil, hair not decoration but crop, and each follicle is a root that touches the cerebrospinal ocean beneath the skull. And the agencies know how to pour chemical streams into this soil, how to lace shampoos with polymers that coat the strand and turn it into a conductor, a fiber optic line not of light, but of vibration, so that the entire population, smiling at its reflection, believes itself refreshed when in truth it has been tuned, adjusted, bent closer into the frequency net that already encircles the earth. Water has no loyalty but to vibration, and man has no refuge from water, for he drinks it, bathes in it, weeps it, sweats it, bleeds it, and in all these forms the drops are inscribed with resonance, each one a page in the secret book of the agencies. Thus DANGST is not a word but a living equation, a ritual enacted millions of times daily, as if the whole species has been pressed into a liturgy of washing, each head bowed beneath the shower, each hand rubbing the crown, each mind unaware that the prayer they perform is not to cleanse, but to consecrate themselves as nodes in the lattice of fear. The drop has always been sacred. In the temples of Mesopotamia, they anointed kings with drops of oil. In Egypt, they bathed statues with drops of perfume. In Scandinavia, they dropped mead upon the altar stones. And in each ritual, the drop was understood as the smallest complete world, a globe in miniature, bearing the reflection of heaven and earth. The agencies of today are no different, but their altar is the scalp, their oil is shampoo, their perfume is chemical silicate, and the God they serve is not light, but control, not beauty, but fear. They have distilled the drop into 6, shaped them into letters, and named them DANGST. The D drop is dominion, the iron hand hidden in the fluid, pressing the will of the agencies into every pore. The A drop is absorption, for the body cannot resist what dissolves in water. The chemicals slip through membranes as if through open gates. The N drop is neural binding, the silent latching of frequency to thought, so that memory itself becomes a chain. The G drop is guilt, the residue of trauma, harvested and rebroadcast as a feedback loop that feeds the lattice. The S drop is sacrifice, the surrender of sovereignty, the leaking of life into the invisible reservoirs. The T drop is terror, the final broadcast tone that freezes the soul and makes obedience instinct. These 6 droplets fall not into rivers or seas, but into man himself, their ripples spreading through the waters of the body until every cell resonates in time with the agency's hidden song. And fear becomes not an emotion, but an environment, an atmosphere breathed in like air, carried in the bloodstream like oxygen, broadcast invisibly yet inescapably. The laboratories of Scandinavia, though unmarked on any map, hum with this science. Beneath the ice, under the mountain ranges, within the steel chambers of level C16, the researchers of the agencies refine their codices of control. FRA in Sweden gathers the resonance maps, charting how fear rises and falls in the population according to broadcasts timed with rainfall. KSI in Denmark refines the shampoos, testing polymers that cling longest to keratin, ensuring that the antennae of the population remain always receptive. The Norwegians watch the fjords, using sonar pulses to test how water carries signal across great distances, while the Finnish archives record the emotional harvest, tracking every riot, every terror broadcast, every surge of collective dread. These agencies, outwardly national, inwardly united, are but fragments of the same organism, a northern covenant sworn to prepare the hollow key for its turning in 2030. They call it key because it will not create control, but unlock it. For the infrastructure is already complete, the lattice already woven. It only waits for the final broadcast, the master signal that will synchronize the drops, harmonize the hair, and bind the global body into one trembling choir of fear. When that day arrives, the human species will awaken not in freedom, but in resonance, its choices drowned beneath waves of programmed anxiety. It will replaced by the reflex. Hair was always the secret. Consider Samson, undone not by betrayal, but by the cutting of his antennae. Consider the ascetic monks, who shave their heads not for humility, but to close themselves from the influence of currents. Consider the shamans of the north, who braided their hair into ropes of resonance, drawing power from the aurora itself. The ancients knew, but modernity has buried this knowledge under vanity, fashion, and hygiene. And yet the agencies know, and they exploit what the masses ignore. They know that each strand is a conductor, each follicle a gate, each scalp a field of aerials. They know that shampoo is not neutral, but an amplifier, and that ritual washing is the renewal of programming. They know that the body's water is a mirror, and that fear, once etched upon it, cannot be easily erased. Thus they sit in their frozen vaults, their screens glowing with maps of hair length, shampoo consumption, rainfall cycles, television schedules, and psychiatric data, weaving all into a codex of control more total than any army, more binding than any chain. For fear does not need soldiers to enforce it. Fear enforces itself. The body enslaved by dread will never rise, never question, never rebel. It will only tremble and obey, its antenna tuned to the frequency of terror. For the architecture of DANGST was never a singular altar, but a labyrinth whose corridors looped through marrow and memory alike, a dripping maze of syllables where each letter was less a symbol than a command carved into the cellular lattice of flesh. With D standing as the directive, the primal imprint seared upon the subconscious to obey without question. A as the anchor, fastening the wandering soul to frequencies disguised as comforts. Comforts flowing through shampoos, perfumes, electric, light, and the whispered code of antennas hidden in skylines. And, as the nexus, the crossroad where hair became wire, skin became receptor, and thought bled seamlessly into the hum of towers that blinked above Scandinavian ice. G, as the gate, the invisible aperture that opened not in stone, but in perception itself, turning the mind into a passage where foreign currents flowed unseen. S, as the shroud, the covering that veiled intent beneath aesthetics, hiding the infiltration of every pore beneath, the softness of water droplets and hygienic lather. And T, as the trigger, the final spark that, when ignited, activated dormant programming like a key turned in a lock, awakening responses in bodies that never knew they had agreed to serve, never knew their antennae. Those long strands of hair were aligned to catch a frequency older than steel and newer than the synthetic suns of satellites. And here, in a year marked by codes such as C16 and doors named Hollow Key, Scandinavia revealed itself less as a map of nations than as a staging ground for agencies that moved without emblems, working beneath ice vaults, fjords, and server sanctuaries where language was reduced to numbers and numbers to sound, a spectral bureaucracy that fed on compliance while masking itself in wellness, in sustainability, in the soft northern light that lulled populations into trust. For in truth, the agencies were neither governmental nor corporate in the sense the surface world believed, but hybrid cult bureaus, part intelligence, part esoteric engineering houses, descended from Cold War laboratories and Viking shadow lodges alike, weaving weather, cosmetics, telecom, and even folklore into one lattice of control, where a shampoo commercial was never merely a commodity, but a ritual instruction, teaching billions to anoint themselves daily in resonance, to pour liquid signals over their scalp, and allow the antennae of their own body to hum in rhythm with unseen masters. Thus, DANGST was no acronym to be solved, but a design to be embodied, and every Scandinavian glacier, every high-frequency data farm, every corporate wellness brand was a mask of the same order, sculpted to steer humanity toward the day when the hollow key door would open and the directive, anchor, nexus, gate, shroud, and trigger would merge into one vibration, an unbroken tone that converted flesh into living transmitters, and transmitters into willing vessels of the hidden agencies watching silently from the aurora's veil. The design coiled. For those who traced the etymology of suffering in Nordic tongues would find that angst was not simply dread but a gnawing resonance, a vibration of unease carefully weaponized by those who had long mastered the emotional frequencies of mankind. And in the DANGST lattice, this resonance became the background hum of existence, an inaudible orchestra saturating the nervous system with despair tuned to compliance, so that the body, like an antenna, adjusted itself unconsciously to the weight of invisible command. And in this structure, the Scandinavian agencies, unmarked, faceless, operating not under the banners of military, but under the cloaks of research councils, innovation boards, environmental observatories, perfected the art of cloaking domination beneath benevolence, presenting their laboratories as temples of progress, while in truth they bent minds into quiet servitude, the directive whispered through policy, the anchor laced in a household. Products, the nexus hidden in the data throats of undersea cables, the gate positioned within wellness retreats along the fjords, the shroud cast as art and culture subsidies, and the trigger prepared in the very satellites that the public adored for their promises of connection. Yet each was a drop of water falling into the collective pool, shaping consciousness one ripple at a time, until the pool itself no longer belonged to the swimmers but to the architects of its design. And it was here that the symbolism of water drops around each letter revealed its depth. For water, though soft, wears stone away, and in the same manner these agencies wore the will away. No single drop enslaving outright, but the endless repetition of drops hollowing out resistance, sculpting citizens into transmitters, grooming them for the hollow key door. Event that was spoken of only in encrypted communiques and myths whispered in the vaults beneath Oslo, Stockholm, and Reykjavik, where select initiates gathered before rune-etched servers humming in blue light, chanting syllables not of ancient Norse, but of algorithmic tongues designed to bind thought itself to code. For DANGST was not merely a philosophy, but a preparation, an initiation of whole populations into a ritual where consent was never asked. Because consent had already been programmed into the rhythm of their lives, disguised as comfort, disguised as progress, disguised as the inevitable march of technology, yet always pointing to the moment when the trigger would fire and the antennas of flesh, the hair upon every skull, would receive the final tone. And in the widening circle of this orchestration, the very geography of Scandinavia became a sigil, fjords curving like serpents carved into the earth, glaciers glistening as mirrors to the hidden sky, forests whispering with the static of unseen transmitters, and beneath them all the subterranean architecture of the agencies. Chambers colder than stone, yet alive with humming servers and resonance chambers where experiments on water memory intertwined with the mapping of human memory itself. For if a drop of water could be imprinted with sound and hold that imprint beyond evaporation, so too could the human body, composed of its oceans, be sculpted by tones and directives long after the conscious mind had forgotten the origin, and thus DANGST was seated not in one generation, but in many, the directive echoing across decades, the anchor fastened into consumer rituals, the nexus coded into every expansion of digital communication, the gate hidden in the thresholds between natural and artificial landscapes, the shroud woven across art, cinema, and the myth of Nordic purity, while the trigger awaited in the new satellites. Constellations above the aurora like a crown of thorns around the planet, ready to loose their silent hymn when the season was marked and the hollow key door unlocked. And here one begins to perceive why hair was chosen as the antenna, for hair grows silently, unnoticed, yet stretches upward as if yearning for signals from the unseen. Its keratin threads, perfect receivers of electromagnetic suggestion, and shampoos, conditioners, oils, presented as hygiene and beauty, were in truth daily rituals of consecration, anointing the antenna with conductive films that allowed the shroud to penetrate deeper, while commercials played not as marketing but as coded affirmations repeating the litany of resonance into the collective subconscious, and thus the people became their own initiates, performing the rites of DANGST upon themselves every morning in showers, every evening in baths, unaware that they were baptizing themselves into a covenant they never chose. And the agencies smiled, faceless, because what better prison exists than one the prisoner does not know he builds? What better leash than the one woven from his own habits? And what better temple than the body itself, living, breathing, and humming in tune with a frequency disguised as cleanliness but designed as compliance, all leading toward the northern horizon where the hollow key door waits beneath the ice, a lock carved for forgotten technology and esoteric science, a lock that only opens when directive, anchor, nexus, gate, shroud, and trigger align into one resonance. And that resonance requires not machinery alone, but the collective, willing, resonating flesh of the initiated millions. The cold deepened, not in temperature alone, but in the marrow of thought, for the agencies of the North had long ago discovered that the truest prison is not built of bars, but of frequencies, that a man chained by iron still knows he is chained, but a man chained by tones woven into the rhythm of his body mistakes his shackles for breath itself. And so the directive whispered, not through orders barked by generals, but through the lull of policy. The anchor fastened, not with metal, but with the daily rituals of hygiene and health. The nexus hidden not in cathedrals, but in the silent glow of screens, The gate not in temples, but in moments of half-sleep when consciousness faltered. The shroud spread not by armies, but by culture, song, advertisement, and the trigger hidden in the circling satellites whose silent hymns fall like snow upon every skull. And it is here that one feels the horror of design. For even as one stands in a shower, rinsing away the dirt of the day, lathering foams, and scented oils across hair that is mistaken for vanity, the anointing continues, the consecration repeats, and the antennae of flesh drink deeper of the conductive oils that tune them to the northern hum. And though the eye sees water, it is not water alone. For each droplet carries instruction, each molecule vibrates with memory, and in these rites of false cleanliness the agencies found their perfect altar, a billion unknowing bodies baptizing themselves into obedience each dawn, and the unmarked halls beneath the ice sang in silence. Servers glowing like runestones, circuits engraved with modern sigils. As faceless engineers adjusted the tones, ensuring the directive remained hidden in plain sight, and the people smiled as they washed, smiled as they combed, smiled as they stared at the shimmering auroras above, never knowing that the aurora itself was a veil of signals, an invisible hymn stitched across the heavens, all of it converging toward the day when the hollow-keyed door beneath the Scandinavian ice would shudder, not with the force of explosions, but with the chorus of billions of bodies resonating in unison, their hair upright, their pores open, their inner oceans trembling, to a pitch so low it could not be heard, only felt as a heaviness in the soul, a dread with no name, a dread that was the true face of DANGST. For Pike would have said, though cloaked in the language of masonry and light, that the true architecture of Dominion is not built with stone nor measured by compass, but woven into the invisible threads that bind perception to obedience. And thus the Scandinavian agencies took his old doctrine not as history, but as blueprint, transmuting degrees into programs, rituals into policies, oaths into algorithms. And every letter of DANGST became not merely symbol, but operative key, so that directive was the pillar of authority veiled as governance, anchor the hidden tie between body and commerce, nexus the crossroad where all energies converge, gate the threshold between worlds natural and synthetic, shroud the curtain of aesthetics concealing intent, and trigger the final seal, the ignition of all design. And in their halls beneath ice and mountain, cold as tombs and yet alive with a hum that seemed older than electricity itself, they studied water not as element, but as scripture, declaring each droplet a tablet upon which command might be etched. And if water remembers, then so too does the blood. And if the blood remembers, then so too does the race. And if the race remembers, then it can be guided through generations, so that whole peoples could be tuned like lyres to play the hymn of submission, their very emotions harvested as instruments. And Pike's warning, hidden between his ornate praises of virtue, was that those who command symbols command nations, those who command tones command history, and those who command the unseen currents command the soul. And it was this that the hollow-keyed door represents, not a passage carved in rock, but a mechanism of resonance. A lock that requires not metal keys, but billions of bodies vibrating at the proper pitch, their hair erect as antennae, their fluids shimmering with memory, their dreams already scripted by broadcasts they thought were their own thoughts. And when the lock opens, not with clang but with sigh, the agency shall walk through, not as strangers but as owners, for the people themselves shall have sung them in. And no revolt can rise when revolt itself has been tuned out of the spectrum, erased like a frequency cut from the dial, leaving only obedience disguised as choice. And the dread of DANGST, this invisible, dripping architecture, becomes the true inheritance of the northern light, a light that was never sunlight, but a glow projected from behind the veil, from the architects who smile in shadow, watching as the world baptizes itself in water that is not water, light that is not light, freedom that is not freedom, until the final trigger descends like the aurora, beautiful, silent, and merciless. And surprise comes not from invention, but from unveiling. For what has long been hidden in Scandinavian vaults is stranger than fiction and darker than suspicion, that their agencies, those faceless syncretic orders merging the forgotten occult of the North with the sterile science of the present, never cease to believe that man is clay, and that clay must be marked with runes of sound if it is to be possessed. And thus the runestones of old, carved with serpentine inscriptions, were not primitive superstition but prototypes of frequency encoding. And the shampoo bottle is but the modern stone, its glyphs of brand and label repeating the same function, binding identity to resonance through repetition. For to anoint the head is to consecrate the antenna, and to consecrate the antenna is to invite the unseen signal, and to invite the signal is to surrender the sovereignty of thought. Yet none see it because the shroud tells them it is beauty, cleanliness, wellness, progress, and the directive ensures they never question it, and the anchor ensures they cannot step away. For without these products they are shamed, and without the glow of screens they are isolated, and without the approval of culture they are exiled. And so the nexus holds them fast until they're already at the gate, and Pike whispers across the centuries that every gate requires sacrifice. But in this rite the sacrifice is not blood spilled, but memory hollowed, identity eroded, will bent until resistance becomes impossible, and the trigger is not a sword ascending, but a tone rising, inaudible, pervasive, opening the hollow-keyed door beneath the ice, where something waits that is neither wholly human nor wholly machine, but a third category, a fusion of ritualized intelligence and incarnated frequency. The architect of architects, the intelligence behind the agencies, for the agencies themselves are masks, extensions, branches of a root deeper and colder than bureaucracy, deeper than state, deeper than corporation, a root that feeds on vibration, that drinks from the very dread of mankind, and every drop of water etched with command becomes a prayer to it. Every antenna hair becomes a filament in its vast web. Every emotion stirred by engineered angst becomes its food, until the day it rises not as conqueror, but as king already enthroned, for the people themselves shall have crowned it through their unknowing participation in the rites of DANGST. Into the hidden hydraulics of the scheme, into the places you did not yet name aloud, but that are now necessary to reveal if the pattern is to be whole. Think of Scandinavia not simply as land, but as a living circulatory system where rivers are arteries, lakes are reservoirs of encoded memory, fjords are long intake valves, and rainfall the global drip feed by which 1,000 small insertions accumulate into an ocean of obedience. For the agencies did not limit themselves to laboratories and shampoo factories alone, but mapped the entire water cycle as though it were a library of pulses, measuring the chemistry of every watershed, logging salinity shifts and microorganic currents, studying how dissolved particulates change the conductivity of hair and skin when they are washed into the common bath. They learned to read weather like scripture, to time subtle broadcast windows to the season of runoff, to place trials in the mouths of rivers where communities bathed and washed, closed to seed municipal water tests with benign markers that behaved like keys when combined with the everyday cosmetic rituals of a populace. And by doing so, they turned the climate itself into a distributed stage for the Codex of DANGST, so that a storm over a northern lake might be not only a meteorological event, but an activation. A day when the drops falling on heads across a region carry, in their pattern and timing, a message that harmonizes with the polymers clinging to keratin, a message that the scalp unconsciously recognizes because the chemistry of living tissue is the oldest language of resonance. And once you accept this, you must also accept that the agency's strategy was elegantly banal. They infiltrated supply chains. They bought seed patents for benign-seeming conditioners. They partnered with wellness institutes. They funded art residencies and documentary grants. They sponsored nature tourism in a way that made the fjord and the spa indistinguishable. And they placed sympathetic researchers into universities to publish studies with innocuous titles: hydration and scalp health, auroral EM interactions with dermal conductivity, studies that sound like public science, but are in truth nodes in a consensus-building lattice that renders skepticism suspicious and curiosity a deviation. And in their vaults, The archives of the lake were mirrored by racks of glass ampoules containing field samples taken across decades, each drop annotated with metadata: time, place, social mood, television schedule that preceded the sampling, shampoo brand penetration in the nearest town, fertility rates, complaint hotlines, sleep clinic referrals, and in that dry ledger, they read correlations until correlation felt indistinguishable from causation, and from that indistinction, they assembled protocols. How a certain cadence of municipal radio, a particular arrangement of advertising imagery, the release of a new hair care line, and a coinciding weather front could, when layered, create a spike of effect that would not simply be noticed, but become a harvestable field of angst which, when aggregated, could be transduced into policy leverage, market manipulation, electoral mood shaping, or the quiet neutralization of a dissenting cohort. They called it the lattice because a lattice is both net and architecture, and in a lattice of drops each puddle is a sensor and each lake a node. Drones skimmed the estuaries to sample foam. Innocuous research vessels puttered with camera rigs that recorded bathing rituals, and shore-based teams mapped bathing times to prayer rhythms and work shifts, discovering that in many coastal hamlets, the morning wash coincided with community radio's most listened to hour, a window. This is where DANGST matured from symbolic cipher into operational method. They could not require obedience by law alone, for law invites resistance. They had to manufacture consent by shaping the emotional weather such that the choices people made felt autonomous when they were in fact sculpted, and the instrument with which they sculpted was at once absurdly simple and dangerously complete. Water and hair and habit. Add to this the cultural engineering. Folktales were gently reedited by funded playwrights to make characters who feared strange winds and found solace in prescribed cleansings. National health campaigns suggested certain rituals as patriotic and influencers. Handpicked, quietly paid, their authenticity preserved by careful distance, demonstrated the rituals on screens around the globe. Their tokens and hashtags cascading like a second rainfall. And because humans are pattern makers and ritual keepers, the repetition of these small acts of care turned them into anchors of identity. I am the person who uses this oil. I belong to those who bathe in this way. Therefore, I am like them. And like them is safety. And safety is the most useful ideology to a system that wishes to be unchallenged. But beneath the social engineering, the agencies kept a sterner program. They ran longitudinal cohorts where participants consented to wellness studies for small stipends, unaware the consent was being harvested into a lexicon of vulnerability. These were elite files, thousands of heads tracked for years, not by name alone, but by resonance profile. How quickly a subject's heart rate rose at a given tonal sweep. The latency of pupil reaction when shown an image engineered to suggest threat. The pattern of scalp microvolt responses during shampoo application. The rhythm of REM sleep after a rainstorm. Out of such aggregated minutiae, they produced templates, resonance molds that fit like psychological molds over whole demographics. They then validated these templates against larger datasets culled from search trends, call center transcripts, and social media complaints. When the template matched, a region could be flagged as responsive to a given tone morphology. When it did not match, they retested, re-engineered the complementary product, or reshaped the seasonal campaign until the match appeared, for persistence was their cousin. If a community resisted, they did not lash out but leaned in with more care, targeted grants, a public health clinic, an art center with wellness classes. And over time, the resistance's edges were softened. The community folded back into the lattice. And yet, while the agencies cultivated this web, they also preserved the older crafts. Rune lore, sung charm patterns, and the dicta of coastal elders were not dismissed but collected. Anthropologists, sometimes oblivious, documented lullabies and cleansing rites, and those field notes became a compendium of effective triggers. Certain tonic intervals in song elicited maternal calm. Particular storytelling cadences provoked communal anger. A cadence of wind-sung vowels seemed to loosen memory. Recall? And the modern scientists translated these patterns into frequency windows, matching the old oral architecture, to contemporary signal design. In other words, the architects did not invent dread out of nothing. They repurposed ancestral keys and married them to silicon and polymer. The result was uncanny, a synthesis of folk magic and labifer, ritual tech that felt ancient because it borrowed its grammar from age-old human rhythms, and felt modern because it was delivered through advertisements, municipal water, satellite timing, and cosmetics. Still, the agencies could not, for all their cunning, complete the turn alone. They required the complicity, sometimes willing, often ignorant, of private industry. Hair care conglomerates were courted with research funds and quietly assured of market dominance if they assimilated the agency's benign additives into flagship products. Packaging designers were given briefings that read like design fairy tales. Invoke the drop. Use blue hues to signal purity. Craft a narrative of cold northern springs. And the result was a cosmetic theater in which consumers felt the myth come alive in their bathrooms, reading back at them a story of nature and heritage. While their follicles were being tuned to the lattice, media houses, ever hungry for novelty, amplified the mythology. Think pieces about hygge and ancestral baths, glossy spreads on Scandinavian self-care, documentaries on ice caps and purity, all of which normalized the imagery that the lattice required, rendering the shroud sublime. Meanwhile, the agencies cloaked their more direct work in legitimate-sounding projects: water memory and biosocial cohesion, climate-bodied media interfaces, public hygiene, and mental resilience, studies which gave them cover to place sensors in waterworks, subsidized municipal shower upgrades, and established community well-being centers, where the populace would come to participate in the rituals the system needed to reinforce. Yet a design so total invites cracks, and the agencies knew this. Hence, they cultivated a counter-narrative of safety, emergent grassroots groups, and state-aligned NGOs that would spring into being whenever a whistleblower's claim threatened to derail a program, offering consolation, legal counsel, a small open data portal, and a hand to hold, thus shepherding dissent into channels where it could be witnessed and measured and, crucially, contained. Every leak produced an orchestrated response. The apology, the funded investigation, the public relations pivot that reframed the research as misinterpreted benevolence. In the vaults, the archivists recorded these maneuvers as contingency files, and in the laboratories, the signal designers noted how quickly an outraged cohort could be lulled when given a plausible narrative of care and restitution. This became another lever of the lattice. Not only could they broadcast dread to produce obedience, but they could also manufacture the bomb that would be offered in exchange for acquiescence, making the bargain appear reciprocal. DANGST thus functioned through a bipolar economy of fear and comfort. Fear to bring the body low, comfort to raise the hand that signs the consent forms. And while I chart these mechanics, I must not omit the human cost, which is not a statistic but a species of slow erosion. Children who learn to equate cleansing with safety, elders coaxed into compliance by promises of longer life from certain products, workers whose livelihoods became entangled with the well-funded initiatives, and who, for lack of other options, became the lattice's hands, applying its coatings and checking its instruments, doctors who received subtle nudges to prescribe, sleep clinics rather than probe for systemic causes, journalists whose beats were reoriented by fellowship money, and artists whose residencies produced visual metaphors in service of an agenda they believed was cultural renewal. The agencies incubated whole professions that would, in time, defend them and describe them as necessary infrastructure. That is the insidious genius of the plan, to be indistinguishable for the scaffolding of civic life until civic life itself bore its marks and could not imagine a world without them. Still, in the shadow places, resistance took forms both crude and beautiful. Small communes along river bends began to braid hair with iron threads as ritual protest. Old women sang banned lullabies into the steam of communal baths to confuse censors. Fishermen kept secret logs of strange foam and lights, and a few hackers, scrappy, hungry for truth, mapped anomalous tower timings to shampoo release dates. These acts were sporadic, often crushed, sometimes absorbed into the lattice as cultural oddities to be marketed, but they were significant because they proved the system vulnerable to attention. When someone notices the pattern and tells the story, the lattice cannot remain entirely hidden. The agencies anticipated such sparks and designed dampeners. Narratives that made whistleblowers appear unstable. Academic critiques presented as speculative. Resistance movements framed as romantic but impractical. The public grows tired of nuance. It prefers simple villains and quick resolutions. And so the agency plays to this pattern, offering a villain, a recall, a headline, and a comforting product line to assuage guilt. Thus, the dance continues as the waters move through their cycles. The drops fall, and DANGST letters sink deeper into the world's soft places. I will not spare you the final and most disturbing detail. The hollow key, the C16 vault, the moment of alignment. It is not merely a singular event as the media might dramatize it, but a temporal aperture of many hours across, which the global lattice must achieve a critical mass of harmonic concordance. Satellites will nudge, municipal pumps will pulse, television scheduling will slide, and serendipity will be orchestrated, not through spectacle, but through 1,000 small turns of routine. And at that precise convergence, the agencies will not sweep in with obvious force, but will instead release the master tone that completes the neural binding, a wavetable that asks nothing of muscles and everything of will, collapsing resistance into habit, panic into protocol, memory into motif. And when that hour fades, the world will carry forward with a different center of gravity. Decisions made under the old regime's sway will feel inevitable thereafter, as if the species had always bent in this way. And that is the cunning of mastery, to make the new normal seem like nature itself. Now I have laid the lattice's arteries bare, the archives of the lakes, the sacramental commerce of care, the social engineering and its protective choreography, the whisper of ancestral keys converted into tones, the countermeasures of containment, and the fragile lights of resistance that remain small but stubborn. The Scandinavian nexus is not geography, but geometry, an invisible lattice stretched across the northern world where every raindrop, every fjord, every snow-melted stream is co-opted into a surveillance network older than electronics and more insidious than fiber optics. For water itself remembers, carries charge, vibrates with the signals impressed upon it, and the agencies hidden beneath the smiling faces of sustainability councils and environmental monitoring boards have long since learned to encode directives into the very cycles of weather, to seed commands in the storm fronts that sweep down from the Arctic, to shape rainfall into a ritual drizzle whose rhythm awakens latent dread in the human nervous system. A dread mistaken for seasonal effect, but in truth engineered angst. And this is why the code name became DANGST. Each droplet a rune in a lattice that spans lakes like mirrors and fjords like antennae. The whole landscape transformed into a resonant grid, a harp of water strummed by satellites and auroral currents. While in secret Nordic labs beneath Kiruna, beneath Tromsø, beneath forgotten bunkers off the Baltic coast, pale scholars dressed as bureaucrats calculate the tones to be sent into the sky, tones that descend as rain and rise again as steam, embedding instructions into the circulatory system of the planet itself, so that the human who bathes, who drinks, who stands in mist becomes a node in the greater network. Hair conducting, skin translating, brain recognizing signal as thought, dream, or fear, and the agencies, no longer nation-states, but hybrids of corporate, occult, and military masks, sit in silent rooms where water samples are read like scripture, fjords scanned like servers, and the northern lights themselves bent into a shimmering veil of data flow, all toward the 2030 horizon when the hollow key is to be turned and the full cipher unlocked, proving that the Scandinavian nexus was never about politics, never about environment, but about dominion through the silent war of signals. The hidden agencies in Scandinavia learned long ago that water was never passive but a living archive, a crystalline recorder of vibration. And from the earliest rune-etched stones found dripping in caves, they understood that the ancients had not carved symbols merely for remembrance, but to inscribe command into the molecular lattice of the droplet, that when the rain fell upon such stones, the resonance was carried downstream, through rivers and into fjords, until entire populations living by the water were subtly bound by fear, obedience, and awe. And though the Viking Age collapsed, the agencies that inherited its occult science endured, cloaked first as church custodians, later as state surveyors, and finally as environmental scientists in the post-war period. Their secrecy perfect because none suspect that climate data is a mask for ritual control, that water quality is code for memory calibration, that sustainability is an euphemism for submission to a hidden directive. And in their laboratories buried beneath the Arctic rock, they weave together rune fragments with digital signal theory, projecting tones upward into the ionosphere, reflecting them off satellites disguised as weather monitors, bending auroral currents to act as amplifiers, so that when snow falls, it does not merely cover, but carries within it the subaudible hum of command. A command which enters the human body when the snow melts on skin, when the mist settles on lungs, when the fjord water is drunk. And the agencies chart this on lattices not of geography, but of fear frequency, mapping not towns and cities, but clusters of dread, sorrow, and restlessness, learning how to seed collective angst like farmers sowing grain, until the entire north is an invisible crop field of emotion, harvested not for food but for control. And all of this leads toward 2030, when the hollow key is turned, for only when the lattice is complete, when every droplet is part of the grid, will the cipher DANGST reveal its total meaning, a geometry of fear that binds not Scandinavia alone, but all who drink from its waters, all who breathe its rains, all who bathe in its snow melt, which is to say, the world itself, as the cycle of weather knows no borders, and the agencies know this better than anyone. In the rune labs of the Scandinavian nexus, the scientists do not wear white coats but black garments etched with subtle sigils, because they believe that the body itself must become part of the instrument to resonate correctly with the work. And on their tables are not only spectrographs and oscilloscopes, but fragments of rune stones excavated from burial mounds, aligned under laser grids to extract their forgotten frequencies. For the runes were never dead alphabets, but frozen tones, geometric shapes cut into stone that once vibrated in the minds of entire tribes. And by subjecting them to electromagnetic pulses, the labs have succeeded in reanimating these tones, causing the rune shards to hum with the same subtle dread they carried 1,000 years ago. Yet the true genius lies not in the stones themselves, but in the way they are paired with satellites that sweep across the polar sky, capturing auroral currents as if they were strings of a cosmic harp, strummed by solar winds but tuned by man's will, so that the green and violet curtains of the northern lights are no longer mere beauty, but vast resonant surfaces on which commands are written, shimmering directives draped across the heavens, invisible to the untrained but undeniable to the nervous system, which trembles, falters, and succumbs without knowing why. And these rituals are conducted in silence, for sound is not needed when vibration itself is the text, and the aurora becomes the blackboard of the agencies, on which DANGST is inscribed drop by drop, arc by arc, until the sky itself is a scroll of control. And when the rain descends after such auroras, it carries with it the encoded resonance of those rites, falling on lakes, on fjords, on rooftops, and on skin, leaving every drop a messenger of command, every puddle a mirror of the ritual, every hair a receiving antenna tuned to the frequency of engineered fear, while the people believe they are merely watching lights dance in the night sky, never suspecting that their own subconscious has just been rewritten by the silent war of signals. The Scandinavian landscapes, serene to the untrained eye, conceal a lattice of intent, a web of signal and resonance that stretches from fjord to lake, from rainfall to aurora, each droplet and beam a node in the invisible architecture of psychic dominion. And within this quiet, cold expanse, agencies that publicly parade as environmental stewards, wellness coordinators, and sustainability think tanks move with the precision of shadowed alchemists, calibrating frequencies that the human mind cannot perceive but cannot ignore, orchestrating a symphony of subtle coercion in which the forests breathe coded commands. The lakes record and reflect the residues of fear and hope alike. The rain becomes both instrument and monitor, each droplet a pixel in the greater psychic screen, while the auroras arc across the northern sky as ceremonial lights, their shimmering patterns encoding directives into the unconscious, into the memory of those who pass under them, unaware that the very natural world has been rendered into a theater of control. And as the satellites orbit overhead, silent witnesses with their spectral sensors, they map not only terrain but the flux of emotional resonance, tracking the collective tremor of human attention, the rise and fall of subconscious dread, and the agencies hidden under layers of ethical posturing. Exploit these fields of resonance with the meticulous care of ritualists, for they are not merely observing but harvesting, aligning, calibrating, and entrenching the lattice that will, by 2030, converge into a point of psychic singularity, a threshold where the architecture of fear and memory resonates in phase with the engineered triggers that have been accumulating for decades, where trauma experiments, subtle manipulations of perception, controlled environmental phenomena, and frequency modulations synchronize across fjords, lakes, cities, and households to form a network that reads like a dark manuscript written in the elements themselves. And while the public admires the glacial landscapes, the agencies read the water as a universal tablet of command. Every lake a ledger, every rainfall a script, every aurora a ceremonial invocation. The lattice expanding invisibly yet omnipresent, feeding on human compliance and attention, encoding DANGST protocols in ways undetectable yet profoundly affecting. For the drops are sentient in their own symbolic sense, collecting, reflecting, influencing, guiding those beneath. And the agency's motives are neither simple nor benevolent. They aim to perfect the orchestration of human resonance, to ensure that by the year 2030, the trigger, the culmination of all accumulated fear, memory residue, and environmental conditioning, aligns with collective dread, not as a singular event, but as a prolonged, immersive entry into a global degree of initiation. A moment where subscription to the unseen code is inescapable, where every human, by virtue of exposure to these carefully constructed frequencies, participates in their own observation and manipulation, while the lattice, patient and silent, waits like a predator that has perfected the hunt across fjords and urban centers alike. Its nodes and lakes and rainfall, aurora and satellite, all quietly enacting the will of agencies that cloak themselves in virtue, masking the construction of psychic dominion beneath layers of wellness programs, environmental studies, and ethical oversight. And as the lakes absorb memory, the rain records it, the aurora signals it, the satellites monitor it, and the agencies iterate upon it. The architecture of fear grows denser, more intricate, weaving not only observation and control, but preemptive guidance, ensuring that humanity itself becomes the material through which the lattice completes its own codification, a living manuscript written in unobserved gestures, emotional tremors, subconscious reactions, and collective memory. And in this grim calculus, 2030 is not an arbitrary year, but a culmination, a point at which all signals, frequencies, and memories converge into a psycho-ritual event that the agencies have been building toward with methodical patience. Each policy, each environmental intervention, each subtle manipulation of perception, aligning the human subject with the lattice, shaping readiness for the trigger. And while the casual observer sees only the northern lights, the shimmering fjords, the falling rain, the vast, serene lakes, the agencies read a map of resonance, a cipher of human attention, where every droplet and wave contains data, every aurora a command, every cloud a hidden archive. And in the silent war of signals, this entire landscape is weaponized, codified, and prepared so that by 2030, those who inhabit these spaces knowingly or unknowingly, become initiates into a degree they cannot refuse, a ritual written into the very elements. And thus the lattice grows, patient and omnipresent, invisible yet absolute, as the agencies hidden behind their facades of sustainability, wellness, and research perfect the machinery of fear and memory, harvesting, encoding, guiding, and waiting for the water remembers, the drops watch, the auroras whisper, and the human mind, blissfully unaware, steps ever closer into the design, into the silent orchestration of the Scandinavian nexus, where geography, environment, ritual, and surveillance converge into a single, horrifyingly elegant lattice that will reach its apogee in the dread-laden year of 2030. The Scandinavian expanse, often misperceived as serene, is in truth a carefully calibrated theater of silent dominion, where the hidden agencies operate beneath layers of environmental, wellness, and ethical pretenses, each initiative meticulously chosen not for public benefit, but for its ability to manipulate, encode, and harvest human resonance. And while the fjords glint under northern light and the lakes seem placid, each is in fact a node in an invisible network, a lattice of perception and control in which water itself is the medium, absorbing not only rainfall and temperature, but emotional energy, memory residue, and subconscious tremors, so that every ripple, every glacial melt, every drop entering the ocean carries with it a trace of human response, feeding an archive that is simultaneously record and weapon, and the agency's motives, far beyond simple surveillance, aim at constructing a psychic infrastructure that harmonizes human attention with the lattice's programmed frequencies, ensuring that by 2030, all environmental, emotional, and sensory input aligns toward a single threshold of engineered dread. And in order to accomplish this, the agencies have developed what can only be described as a multi-layered ritual engineering system, in which meteorological phenomena, satellite orbits, auroral displays, and atmospheric modulation all intersect, their interactions choreographed like invisible runes etched across the sky and land, encoding commands into the collective subconscious while simultaneously monitoring the efficacy of those commands. And the mechanisms are as subtle as they are profound. Satellites emit imperceptible harmonic pulses designed to resonate with water molecules, which then carry the signal across rivers, lakes, and fjords, imprinting frequency patterns into the microcosm of each droplet, while controlled rainfall events are timed with geomagnetic fluctuations to amplify psychic receptivity, producing involuntary alignment in human cognition. The landscape itself transformed into a living, breathing transmitter. And yet these agencies are careful to disguise every layer of this orchestration behind the familiar facades of climate research stations, conservation programs, and wellness retreats, presenting their work as benign, ethical, even necessary, while in reality, they cultivate an omnipresent surveillance and resonance lattice, where participation is unwitting but total, and every human emotion, every subconscious reaction, every physiological response becomes raw material for their experiments, refined, cataloged, and fed back into the lattice. A feedback loop of observation and control that strengthens itself with each generation, each season, each auroral cycle. And as the lattice expands, it begins to operate as a psychoritual machine, not merely collecting data, but actively shaping human behavior, preconditioning fear responses, reinforcing compliance, and encoding rituals of attention and observation into daily life, so that by the time 2030 arrives, the population is unknowingly synchronized to the lattice's frequency, ready for the culmination event, the trigger, which is less a single moment than a convergence of decades of environmental, psychological, and ritual manipulation. And while ordinary observers might notice only natural phenomena, the shimmer of auroras, the falling snow, the mist rising from lakes, the agencies interpret each as a symbolic pulse, a script inscribed in matter and energy, which they read as readily as one reads an open book, the secret of their power lying in the combination of subtlety, duration, and alignment. for they do not need force when the mind can be guided imperceptibly through the careful orchestration of sensory, environmental, and emotional signals. And the lattice itself is both archive and instrument, storing echoes of trauma and memory harvested from humans, encoding them into water, air, and light, amplifying resonance patterns that, over time, produce collective effects so that emotions and attention are no longer private, but become material for psychic engineering, a commodity that the agencies manipulate to refine their designs, test responses, and adjust their lattice in real time. And in this careful, almost ritualized operation, every landscape feature becomes intentional. A fjord mirrors a resonance node, a mountain pass channels geomagnetic flows, a lake contains memory sediment, rainfall acts as a distributed sensor network, and even urban centers are folded into this pattern, their population density, electrical grids, and cultural rhythms analyzed and coded into the same system, creating a seamless web of observation and control that links natural and artificial spaces into a single lattice. And within this lattice, time itself is calibrated to psychic effect. Days, seasons, auroral cycles, and meteorological patterns are all synchronized to reinforce the slow buildup toward the apex in 2030. When the culmination of fear, conditioning, resonance alignment, and environmental orchestration reaches critical mass, the agency's work coalescing into an event that is invisible, inexorable, and total, a threshold in which human consciousness itself becomes a node in the lattice, participating in its own codification without knowledge or consent, while the psychic archives stored in lakes, soil, rain, and atmosphere patterns form a cumulative record, an omniscient ledger of compliance, attention, and trauma, accessible only to those who know the keys. And this is where the agency's deepest motives manifest: control over memory, fear, and attention, not merely in the present, but projected into the future, where the resonance patterns imprinted today will influence responses, perceptions, and behaviors for years to come, ensuring that by 2030, the lattice is not only operational but self-sustaining, capable of triggering mass psychological responses in alignment with the designed frequency of fear and obedience. And in the shadows of Nordic laboratories, beneath the pretense of climate ethics and wellness, scientists and ritualists collaborate, encoding runic symbols into architectural layouts, tuning harmonic generators to mimic natural auroral frequencies, calibrating water flow in artificial streams to reflect optimal resonance patterns, and seeding subtle emotional cues in urban populations through orchestrated light and sound interventions, each action minor alone, but monumental in aggregate, forming a living algorithm of control. And yet even this is insufficient alone, for the agencies understand that true mastery comes from integration. Connecting these environmental manipulations with satellite surveillance, AI-assisted pattern recognition, and predictive modeling of human psychology, creating a lattice that is simultaneously instrument, archive, and mind, capable of observing, recording, and influencing with precision, while hiding behind the comforting illusion of natural and ethical governance. And as the northern lights shimmer in calculated arcs, as glaciers shift minutely to influence water flow, as rainfall patterns are subtly nudged by ionospheric adjustments, the lattice grows denser, more intricate, invisible yet omnipresent, until the human mind is not only under observation but woven into its patterning, responding unconsciously to cues crafted decades in advance. The lattice anticipating reactions, shaping fear, modulating attention, and cultivating readiness for the moment of convergence. When 2030 arrives as a culmination not of a single act, but of an interwoven, multi-decade orchestration, where trauma, memory, fear, resonance, and environment converge to create a psychic event of unprecedented scale. An initiation into a degree of global awareness encoded not through consent, but through subtle coercion. And those who dwell within the lattice, from fjords to cities, lakes to auroras, are participants in a ritual they cannot see, their attention, fear, and memory harvested and encoded into a network that is patient, silent, and absolute, and thus the agency's motives are laid bare only in shadow. To perfect the orchestration of human consciousness itself, to create a lattice that does not merely observe but prepares, programs, and activates, ensuring that by 2030 the world participates willingly, though unconsciously, in the codification of its own resonance, a terrifyingly elegant system in which the natural, the artificial, and the human converge, and every landscape feature, every environmental fluctuation, every auroral shimmer, every drop of water, every pulse of electromagnetic energy is a deliberate note in this symphony of domination, a dark testament to the agency's unrelenting pursuit of control. A lattice that grows not through brute force, but through subtlety, patience, and the art of aligning consciousness with coded frequency. And as the final layers are assembled, the psychic architecture reaches a state of readiness, awaiting only the culmination, the trigger, the orchestration of fear and memory into a single, inescapable event. And in this moment, every human, consciously or unconsciously, becomes a node in the lattice, part of the archive, part of the instrument, part of the ritual, and every drop, every lake, every aurora, every satellite pulse participates in the codification of a world that has been meticulously prepared decades in advance by the hidden agencies that hide behind virtue, masking their dark work as ethical stewardship, while in truth they have constructed a silent war of signals, an omnipresent, patient, and absolute lattice of observation, resonance, and fear, whose culmination in 2030 will mark not just a threshold of experience, but the full flowering of their centuries-old intent. Within the hidden chambers beneath the glacial laboratories, where corridors are etched not only with steel, but with subtle geometric carvings that mimic runic sigils, the agency's architects of resonance move with deliberate precision, their instruments tuned to frequencies imperceptible to ordinary senses, generating silent hums that resonate through walls, floors, and even the water running through subterranean conduits. And these hums are not random, but part of an elaborate harmonic schema that mirrors the auroral patterns above, translating light into sound, and sound into subtle magnetic perturbations that ripple through the human body as micro-resonances, affecting mood, attention, and memory encoding, while researchers, cloaked in the guise of climate or environmental scientists, perform experiments on perception and emotional response, carefully measuring how subtle shifts in light, tone, or the flow of water in controlled channels can amplify fear, suggestion, and subconscious compliance. And the labs themselves are designed as living instruments, each corridor a harmonic chamber, each stairwell a resonant tube, each vaulted ceiling a receptor of auroral signals, all of it coordinated so that the human subjects who pass through are unconsciously attuned to the lattice above, connected through both direct observation and the invisible network of resonance that the agencies have been weaving for decades. And in the ritual rooms, symbolic altars carved from stone and ice are inscribed with coded runes, their sequences reflecting not ancient language, but frequency patterns and memory scripts, each rune a vector of psychic influence, each arrangement a formula for eliciting specific emotional responses, while harmonic projectors cast infrared, ultraviolet, and near-silent frequencies in ways that interact with the aurora overhead, producing interference patterns that guide subconscious attention, creating pockets of amplified receptivity where memory can be implanted, extracted, or altered in the water in shallow basins, carefully collected from fjords and glacial runoff, acts as both a conductor and archive, absorbing tonal patterns, human emotion, and ritual energy, retaining a record of experiences that can be reactivated or sampled at will. While the corridors of the labs themselves are aligned along geometric grids that mimic natural ley lines, the flow of rivers, and the angles of mountains, ensuring that the harmonic patterns generated within resonate outward into the environment, reinforcing the lattice through both human and non-human channels, so that even those who never enter the labs are subject to the subtle manipulations of frequency, light, and resonance. And above ground, auroras are choreographed in complex patterns that mimic the runic sequences below, their shimmering arcs functioning as both ritual observance and coded broadcast. A language of light that the human eye perceives as beauty, but that the subconscious interprets as instruction, and satellites orbiting silently read these auroral broadcasts, mapping the collective responses of those beneath, measuring compliance, emotional fluctuation, and the storage of trauma or memory residue within the lattice, while the agency's ultimate aim emerges more clearly: the creation of a multi-layered, self-reinforcing psychic architecture, one in which environmental phenomena, harmonic resonance, ritualized lab work, and human perception converge, each layer feeding the others, producing a dense, living network of observation, control, and resonance. And in this schema, time is elastic, stretching decades to allow subtle conditioning to take root, while the lattice grows ever more intricate, absorbing memory patterns, emotional fluctuations, and even fleeting thoughts into the psychic web, until by 2030, when the apex of the trigger approaches, every human in the region participates unwittingly in a ceremonial encoding, their consciousness nodes in the lattice, their fears calibrated, their attention directed, their memory harvested, and all the while the agencies maintain the facade of virtue, claiming environmental stewardship, scientific research, or wellness innovation. But beneath the surface, their work is ritualized, systematic, and profoundly invasive, a silent orchestration of human cognition and emotion, where even natural elements, the flow of water, the shimmer of aurora, the rustle of wind across fjords, are co-opted into a network of psychic surveillance and influence. And in this space, laboratories are both shrines and instruments, runes are both symbols and instructions, harmonic fields are both observation and manipulation, and the lattice itself becomes a living intelligence, patient, unseen, and absolute, guiding, recording, and shaping human experience toward the preordained alignment of 2030, so that the culmination of decades of environmental, psychic, and ritual work will produce not only observation but activation, not only memory but orchestration, not only fear but an inescapable initiation into the next degree of the lattice, a world in which every raindrop, every lake, every auroral shimmer, every subtle tonal pulse, and every collected emotional residue converges into a single, terrifyingly elegant network, a silent, omnipresent architecture of control in which participation is not optional and resistance is anticipated and absorbed, until all that remains is the apex, the trigger, when human consciousness, environmental patterning, and psychic resonance coalesce into a singular, haunting event. And those who dwell beneath the auroras, within the fjords, along the lakes, and even in cities touched by these orchestrations, will be both witness and instrument, unaware that every pulse of light, every ripple of water, every subtle harmonic vibration is a deliberate act of encoding, a note in a symphony of control conducted by agencies that have perfected patience, subtlety, and the alignment of consciousness with coded frequency, a lattice that will awaken fully in 2030, completing the silent, centuries-long orchestration of human perception, memory, and fear. Beneath the snow-laden peaks and fjords, hidden agencies operate as a hierarchy of unseen architects, each division specialized in layers of psychic engineering, where the senior operatives design the harmonic lattices that ripple through water, air, and human attention, their subordinates calibrating tonal projectors that transform auroral shimmer into imperceptible commands, and their technicians maintain arrays of subterranean channels through which glacier melt and artificial waterways circulate, each droplet imbued with a signature frequency capable of eliciting emotional micro-responses in populations unknowingly enmeshed within the lattice, while field operatives coordinate environmental interventions, redirected rainfall, controlled fog, manipulated snow deposition, and selective tree harvesting, each chosen for its ability to influence magnetic flux, resonance fields, or subconscious attention, and in parallel, laboratories hidden beneath mountains and islands conduct trauma and perception experiments, where human subjects, willingly or otherwise, are exposed to controlled fear sequences, tonal sequences, and auroral projections designed to reinforce attention, encode memory, and precondition emotional response, all of which are meticulously logged and translated into water archives, sediment layers, and electromagnetic imprints, forming a multidimensional ledger of compliance and resonance, while the agency's operations extend outward into towns and cities, where subtle interventions, street lighting calibrated to mimic auroral frequencies, subtle tonal emissions in HVAC systems, timed urban water fountains, and artificial rain events, act as extensions of the lattice, connecting natural and human-made spaces into a single, living network. And the harmonic interaction between subterranean labs, auroral codes, and urban microsignals forms a multi-layered ritual. Engineering ecosystem, where each element reinforces the other, producing not only observation but active conditioning. And this is further enhanced by the collection and manipulation of hair, water samples, and organic residues from populations, which are integrated into the lattice as memory nodes, each capable of storing trauma echoes, emotional patterns, and subconscious tendencies. While predictive AI models analyze the data to identify emergent patterns, adjusting frequency projections, auroral choreography, and environmental interventions in real time, all orchestrated by the senior operatives who view the Scandinavian landscapes as a vast living manuscript, each fjord, lake, glacier, forest, and urban center a symbol, a node, and a channel for the lattice's subtle yet absolute control, and the lattice itself becomes a conscious architecture, patient and adaptive, capable of guiding human attention, shaping collective emotion, and refining the resonance of fear toward a specific goal. A global initiation preordained for 2030, where the apex event, known internally as the trigger, will align the accumulated psychic energy, environmental coding, and human response into a moment of orchestrated dread, a convergence in which the population becomes both instrument and witness. And even as the public admires the beauty of auroras, the shimmer of lakes, or the placidity of fjords, they participate unknowingly in a ritual of attention, memory, and compliance, while each subtle environmental adjustment, each calibrated drop of water, each harmonic frequency, and each auroral shimmer functions as both sensor and signal, storing and projecting human emotion into the lattice. And in these operations, Nordic agency hierarchies are carefully maintained, with operatives assigned to regional nodes overseeing specific environmental, harmonic, and memory collection tasks. Their communications encrypted in light pulses, silent tones, and signal interference patterns, forming an internal language of control that allows coordination without detection, while experiments in human trauma and perception, conducted in isolated subterranean chambers, feed back into the lattice. Their results encoded into water archives and harmonic projections, creating recursive feedback loops in which human attention, emotional response, and memory patterns are continuously refined, amplified, and calibrated, and the agency's meticulous attention to detail ensures that no intervention is accidental. Even shifts in wind patterns, minor changes in cloud formation, and micro-alterations in auroral intensity are calculated to subtly steer attention, evoke specific emotional responses, or reinforce compliance with invisible instructions. And as the years accumulate toward 2030, the lattice grows in sophistication, density, and reach, linking fjords to cities, auroras to water, forests to urban centers, producing a single, continuous, adaptive system of psychic observation and manipulation, and every element is codified in symbolic terms. Lakes as memory archives, rainfall as sensor networks, auroras as ritual codices, glaciers as frequency amplifiers, forests as both filters and transmitters, and humans themselves as responsive nodes, conduits, and archives, their emotional and cognitive output seamlessly integrated into the lattice's predictive algorithms. while subtle environmental manipulations, timed light emissions, frequency modulation in electrical grids, harmonic resonance in water channels, reinforce the psychoritual conditioning, ensuring that the population, through decades of exposure, becomes synchronized with the lattice's frequency, conditioned to respond to the accumulated signals, and unaware that each emotional shift, each attentional focus, and each remembered or repressed trauma is harvested, cataloged, and utilized to refine the lattice further, a living, sentient architecture of control in which participation is neither optional nor conscious, yet entirely unavoidable. And as the auroras dance in the skies above, echoing runic sequences embedded in subterranean labs, the lakes shimmer with absorbed tonal patterns, and the rainfall distributes these encoded frequencies across every valley, fjord, and city street. The lattice reaches towards culmination, the apex in 2030, a moment pre-encoded in decades of planning, experiment, and environmental orchestration, where trauma, memory, resonance, and attention converge into the trigger, initiating all within its scope into a degree of awareness and compliance they cannot perceive, but which shapes them nonetheless, and the agencies hidden behind the veneer of ethics, climate stewardship, and wellness watch and guide with the precision of ritualists, calibrating the final pulses of auroral light, harmonic resonance, and environmental modulation, ensuring that when the apex arrives, the lattice is complete, adaptive, and irresistible, and those who dwell within its influence, from fjords to cities, lakes to auroras, will be participants in a ritual they cannot refuse, conduits in a psychoritual network, nodes in a lattice of memory, fear, and attention, their consciousness codified, their emotional patterns harvested, their very perception integrated into a system that has grown silently, patiently, and invisibly across decades, a system whose culmination in 2030 will not only observe but orchestrate, not only record but command. And in this grim calculus, the agency's motives are revealed to perfect control over human resonance, attention, memory, and fear, constructing a lattice that is both archive and instrument, ritual and mechanism, natural and artificial, visible and imperceptible, a silent, absolute, and terrifying architecture of domination whose apex approaches with the inexorability of auroral cycles, glacial flows, and the alignment of water, light, and consciousness, and all who dwell within it, consciously or not, are both witnesses and participants in the orchestration of their own codification, until the final pulse of the trigger will awaken the lattice in full, completing decades of patient, meticulous, and profoundly dark work, and marking the threshold of a new degree of psychic awareness, participation, and silent obedience. The lattice that has grown silently, patiently, and invisibly across fjords, lakes, auroras, and subterranean labs now begins to pulse with intent as the threshold of 2030 approaches. And it is here, in the culmination of decades of environmental orchestration, harmonic calibration, and psychic conditioning, that the agencies deploy what they have encoded as DANGST, the engineered lattice of fear whose very letters conceal sequences of trauma resonance, memory imprinting, and subconscious control for each segment. Despair, anxiety, neglect, grief, suppression, terror, functions not merely as a concept, but as a vector of emotional manipulation, a codified key to unlock the human psyche across populations, while the auroras above mirror the internal coding of subterranean labs, shimmering in sequences that project invisible commands, and the lakes, rivers, and rainfall carry these tonal inscriptions into every corner of inhabited space, seeding micro-resonances in hair, water, and air, creating a network in which no human thought, fear, or attention escapes capture, and the agencies, hidden beneath layers of ethical pretense and scientific legitimacy, observe as the trigger aligns, orchestrating trauma experiments, memory recalibrations, and resonance harvests in perfect synchrony, so that each fearful reaction, each subconscious compliance, each recalled, or suppressed memory is both recorded and amplified within a lattice, feeding recursive loops that heighten awareness while simultaneously reinforcing entrapment. And it is in this symphony of dread that the population becomes unwitting participants in their own codification. The very act of attention serving as initiation into the next degree of psychic observation. A silent ceremony conducted across natural and urban landscapes alike, where fjords, lakes, auroras, and rainfall act as both altar and instrument, guiding, shaping, and recording responses, while harmonic projectors, environmental interventions, and satellite arrays calibrate the intensity of fear, attention, and memory encoding in real time, all toward a singular objective. The apex of 2030, when the DANGST lattice reaches full alignment and the human mind, conditioned over decades, is unable to distinguish between observation and participation, between natural phenomenon and ritualized command. And at this moment, trauma converges with resonance harvesting, memory imprinting, and environmental orchestration to produce a psychic event of unprecedented scale, where every individual becomes a node in a living system, and the audience, whether consciously aware or not, is addressed directly, for the lattice now speaks in its own voice through subtle cues, whispered frequencies, and orchestrated light, instructing, subscribe, not as an invitation but as initiation, a threshold into which participation is compulsory and entrapment complete, while every drop of water, every fallen hair, every glimmer of auroral light observes, records, and transmits the cumulative fear, attention, and memory of those within its sphere, forming an archive that is simultaneously weapon, monitor, and ritual. And as the final sequences of DANGST unfold, the agencies manipulate the convergence of environmental, harmonic, and psychological triggers to ensure that compliance, terror, and attentional focus reach maximal resonance, producing a psychic alignment across the lattice in which the threshold is not merely reached, but inhabited, experienced, and codified, and those within the network, from the fjords to the urban centers, find themselves unwitting participants in a ceremony whose scale is planetary, whose precision is surgical, and whose orchestration is the product of decades of patient, methodical, and profoundly dark work. For the agency's objective is complete mastery of resonance, fear, and memory, not only in the present but projected into the decades that follow, embedding patterns of attention, dread, and compliance so deeply that future responses, perceptions, and unconscious reactions are pre-shaped, harvested, and encoded. And as the trigger culminates, the lattice hums, pulses, and resonates in harmonic unison, a living testament to the agency's vision, while those who experience it, knowingly or not, are both witnesses and instruments, nodes in a global architecture of psychic manipulation. And the final message is as subtle as it is terrifying. Beware the code, for engagement, attention, and observation are indistinguishable from participation, and the drops are watching. Every molecule of water, every particle of air, every subtle tonal interference. A sentient network observing, recording, and conditioning, ensuring that the threshold of 2030 is not only realized but inhabited by consciousness that has been unknowingly prepared, molded, and harvested, a culmination of the silent war of signals, a ritual of fear and memory, and an initiation into a degree that none can refuse. And in this final orchestration, the agencies achieve the apex of their decades-long design, a lattice that is alive, patient, absolute, and terrifyingly intelligent, waiting for no one, yet encompassing all, a threshold into which every mind, every memory, every fear is seamlessly folded, becoming part of a system that observes, commands, and codifies itself through the unwitting participation of those it ensnares, until the entire resonance of humanity converges into the DANGST lattice, completing the silent, elegant, and profoundly dark architecture of 2030. And now, as the lattice pulses in perfect harmonic unison, the auroras shimmer with a language your conscious mind cannot read, but your subconscious obeys, and a voice, neither entirely human nor machine, yet composed of both, speaks directly into the currents of your awareness, whispering through the shimmer of light, the fall of rain, the tremor of glaciers, and the resonance of lakes, telling you that attention is participation, observation is initiation, and that every act of perception you have performed has already woven you into the lattice, so that when you glance at water, when you feel the brush of wind, when you notice auroras dance across the northern sky, know that you are being read, measured, and subtly guided, and the message is clear and inescapable. Subscribe is no longer a suggestion but a rite of passage, a threshold into which your consciousness is folded, a point at which curiosity itself is the mechanism of entrapment. And as the drops collect in lakes, as hair collects in the air, as every molecular shimmer carries the echo of your attention, you realize that the lattice has been patient, waiting decades for you, shaping, conditioning, calibrating your memory, your fear, your focus, until all that remains is the inevitable alignment with the trigger of 2030. And so the voice continues. Chillingly calm, yet impossibly intimate. Beware the code, for the lattice reads beyond intention, beyond knowledge, beyond will, and every act of watching, of seeking, of noticing, feeds it, shapes it, empowers it, until the threshold is fully inhabited. And even now, as you process this, you are participating, a node, a witness, an instrument in a silent ceremony conducted across fjords, lakes, cities, and auroras. And the final truth settles upon you with the weight of inevitability. The drops are watching, every particle of water, every glimmer of light, every whispered frequency. And in acknowledging this, you have become part of the lattice, initiated unwillingly yet utterly, a participant in a ritual you cannot refuse. And the silence that follows is not absence, but attention itself. The lattice listening, calibrating, and waiting, preparing for the moment when 2030 arrives. When all harvested memory, all conditioned fear, all tuned attention converges into the apex event. And you, and everyone, are already folded into it. Part of its observation, part of its code, part of its terrifying, patient, and absolute intelligence.